enabled for those that might need it. In order to access that resource on your toolbar, you'll see a little CC. If you hit that arrow up, you'll have some options as to how you would like your closed captioning to appear on your screen. All right, Jenny, one more slide for me. We do ask, in order to ensure that we capture your attendance properly, that you rename yourself utilizing your first and last name. Make sure we don't have any iPhones in there, so we can also call you if we need and let you know that we think you're doing a great job, but we need to know who you are. Here's just a quick example of how you do that. You would go to participants, click next to your name. There are three little dots will show up, or more if you're using a Mac, and then hit rename, and there'll be a little box that pops up so that you can enter your first and last name. We have our Canvas site that I'm going to drop once more in chat for you. It has access to all of the past slide decks, the recordings. The front page will also let you know how you can get in touch with myself and our star presenters. The final one I really want to bring to your attention today, the last tab is called Resources. It has the links. Ginny and Matt are going to be going over lots of different resources today. All of those links can be found in that Resources tab. And I'll turn it over to your wonderful presenters this evening.
So hi everybody, welcome. Hope everybody's enjoying their Thursday and only one more day till the weekend. Woohoo. All right, so we are in part 4 of this CAST webinar series, and this is just a reminder of what we've done in some of the other sessions. So the very first session took a deep dive into how the CAST is designed. In session 2, we talked about identifying the accessibility, tongue-tied, accessibility resources and getting students ready to take the test and how to do these different kinds of tasks. Then we talked about how you prepare your students for this by presenting them with performance tasks, both formatively and probably summatively, and getting them to really understand the 3 dimensions of taking these tasks, or doing these tasks, and in particular, also doing some of the assessments that are built like the ones that they'll see on CAST. And so then today what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go deeper into that. So how would you build your own performance tests? How would you evaluate some of the performance tests that you've already looked at? And how would you embed them in the 3D learning? So we're really looking forward to this. And even if you haven't done the first 3 series, you definitely can still jump in and gather some information today from our session 4. So again, our agenda is introductions and recap. And then we really want to spend most of our time on number 2 and 3, which is how to build a good assessment by looking at some that have already been built, and then how you might model doing that for yourself, and then providing you some tools to support modifying and creating performance tasks for formative use in the classroom. And our goal here is that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. There's ways to start with a performance task that you already have and make it better and more 3D aligned. So a reminder of what we see when we're talking about assessments. First of all, we all know about summative assessments, which are more encompassing. They're usually at the end of a period of instruction, a lesson sequence, or the end of a semester, etc. And these provide information for you about the progress your students are making, right? As they move on to the next lesson sequence or to the next grade level. We also know about assessments for learning using formative assessments, and these are the ones that we hope you're doing daily and help you inform the decisions you're making in your classroom so that the next class period time you know what you need to focus on. So this is just a reminder of that, and I just want to remind you again that we're trying to look at these both from a lens of producing 3-dimensional assessments. We also want to remind you that we have a wonderful resource bank for you, as Sarah mentioned, and one of the ones that we tend to suggest you bookmark is the Stanislaus one because it has access to all the other ones that we're talking about. So they are kind of a warehouse that holds and gives you connections to all these others, as well as other things that that site provides. And we'll talk more about that again as we move through this talk. So let's look at some good assessments. And we're going to start by looking at an assessment that's not so good. So here's a start of a one-dimensional assessment that people pre-NGSS might have given. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read this. So hopefully everybody has access to a screen so they could look at this assessment. So this is very one-dimensional. There's a lot of text there, and there's really only one question they're asking at the end. So let's compare this to a vetted one. And this is a performance test that was written by SNAP, which is the Stanford team. And again, if you go to the Stanislaus site, you have access to all the SNAP assessments, but you also can go to the SNAP site. So let's look at this in pieces. Here's the example, same scenario. So part one of this assessment has the students look at these three slides in a sense. And what do you notice about this compared to what we just saw? If anybody wants to come off mute or put it in the chat real quick.
Definitely more accessible for any language learner.
Yeah. And how is that? Why is that?
There's a visual representation of the text.
Yes, right? So you wouldn't have to know what Australia looks like to answer these questions, but it's really nice for students to actually see this ecosystem compared to that last one, right? And get to see a picture of what a kangaroo looks like and where in the world it is, right? So all of those things help. So this is one of the assessments that uses modeling. And I know in session 3, you did another type of modeling with the lunchbox if you were part of that series. And what you see here is that they start them with this model showing two parts of the ecosystem, so the kangaroos and the plants. And so the idea here is and you can think about what you would do if you were doing this model. And I suggest maybe you think as a student would and figure out how you might present and add to this model as we go. So the question that they're first asking is how matter moves from plants to kangaroos in this ecosystem. So the students would be asked to actually explain what they're seeing in this model. So this model is started for them. After that, so they would be given a blank sheet of paper like this, and then they could throw in their explanations. So what are some of the things that students might put in there? Just put a couple words is fine in the chat real quick, thinking about this. What's the simplest explanation of how matter moves through from the plant to the kangaroo? The kangaroo consumes the plants, consumption through the carbon cycle. And so students would write this, but they would want to try to describe based off their own knowledge as to what they think is happening. Then they would be prompted to add this second part to their model. So in this second part, we know that there's also non-living things involved in this ecosystem. And in fact, one of the things is soil. And how can soil contribute to plant needs? And what is another non um, living thing that plants would need? So on this model, you'd be asked to draw arrows to show how the matter moves and think about some of those non-living things and the rest of the ecosystem. Any ideas? Quiet bunch today. And again, thinking about what a student, um,
You're getting carbon cycle, consumption, sunlight and soil,
oh, good, sunlight and soil. And so good. So,
moderate temperatures.
yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't have my chat open, so I couldn't see. It's hard to do that at the same time. So, and I think one of the things that's really important about this is that students learn how to draw arrows and connect these things to the part of the model they already have. So there's a lot of importance on the connections that they're making between these. So then the next part of this would be to add a description of how the matter moves from the non-living to the living parts of the ecosystem, such as the kangaroo. And so they can use specific examples from their model to explain their ideas. Again, building on this. So then after this, so they would have a chance to build on their model and add some descriptive words and arrows. And then they would be introduced to part two. So in part two, they're told about the rabbits and how much they grew in population size and what they did. So now they would be asked to add rabbits to their model and draw one or more arrows to show how that the matter moves between the rabbits and the other parts of the ecosystem. And they would also be asked to address the question, why do you think many plants could not survive after rabbits were introduced into the ecosystem? Any ideas?
There are too many plant-eating predators.
Yes. There was more rabbits than plants, maybe? Yes. And you might ask, so students might be able to demonstrate that with arrows up and down for growth, etc. What about what's going on here? If this, if the scientists were to reduce the rabbit population, what would that do? How did the rabbits actually make the ecosystem weaker?
They consumed all the plants, so the kangaroos now don't have any plants to eat.
Right, and getting students to make those connections. And there'd be several things they could talk about, right? So one of them would be the kangaroos, but they could talk about other aspects of the ecosystem if they have that knowledge. So what scientists decided to do was add disease to lower the numbers. And of course, the disease killed many rabbits all at once. And this, of course, created a problem for the environment. So there were so many dead rabbits that the ecosystem was overwhelmed at first, but eventually the decomposers cleaned them up. So now we'd be adding decomposers to our model and asking students to think about how those are connected to what we saw in the building of the model with the kangaroos and the plants and the non-living aspects of it. And also getting students to talk about how decomposers are part of this whole cycle and how they help matter move through the system. So the question here, the final question that's asked is this ecosystem would not survive without the decomposers. So how did the decomposers clean up the rabbits? And how do decomposers work in a whole ecosystem? And why are they so important in an ecosystem? And this would be something that students can draw on their own knowledge about decomposers, even if they've never thought about decomposers decomposing a whole bunch of rabbits. And because now they've been introduced to that. So what are the similarities and differences between these two assessments? And I really do want a few people to respond, please, about what you think were some of the similarities and some of the differences between this one-dimensional and this three-dimensional. Um, so I'll give you a couple minutes to type some answers. Also, or if you want to come off mute, that's fine too.
Well, I really like that last question because it really incorporates cause and effect. This higher level thinking of it's not just plants that, that it's not just rabbits that would die or plants that would die. It's how do decomposers respond to rabbits that are dying because of the way the rabbits are affecting the plants. The students really have to show their understanding, like a true in-depth understanding of the relationships and connections rather than regurgitation.
Could they have done that in that first assessment?
No, no, it was just regurgitation of information, like recall.
Hmm.
Carlos let us know in chat that the difference is that the 3D triggers the use of background knowledge.
Right. Did they need to know about kangaroos in the Australian ecosystem?
I believe, maybe limited information, but the visuals add kind of, I would say, helps them build those schemata or the schemas that they probably have and anchor that new the cognitive demand of the question. Um, it helps them to put them into more of a perspective that they can actually apply knowledge and test it out just to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, Liliana, I totally agree. And that's one of the things I noticed. That first description was super long for a student to read and get lost in the data that they're throwing out at them, right? But this was broken into pieces. It has all the same data in it, but it's broken it and scaffold, right? Which helps their learning and their connecting of those pieces. So
And
that's one of the things I noticed too.
yeah, and it kind of frees up working memory for the kids, right? Because they're processing less information, more precise and concise.
Hmm.
So they're concentrated on the task at hand rather than try to interpret or analyze what it means. And they get caught up in maybe a vocabulary word that they don't understand, and then that adds more to their cognitive demand.
Right. I totally agree. So thank you all for that. And those of you that aren't contributing, hopefully that you're noticing the difference. And we've all taken those one-dimensional assessments, and I'm ashamed to say I've probably given some of those over the years, right? Because I've been at this for a long time and don't always think
No,
three-dimensionally.
don't be ashamed. We've all grown. This is great.
Um, so how do we, what ways can we think, how would we know whether this was a good assessment or not? Besides the fact that Stanford gave it and vetted it with real kids and things like that. But, say you're taking one that you're not sure whether it really aligns with what NGSS intended. So we can look at evidence statements, and I think these were introduced one of the weeks before. But this one is, I'm actually going to not stop my screen. I'm going to escape this for a minute. Um, eh, because I actually called it up because I realized I didn't take a picture of the top part of the evidence statement for this. So what you'll notice here is that for ecosystems, interactions, energy, and dynamics for fifth graders. They're supposed to develop a model to describe the movement of matter among plants, animals, decomposers, and the environment. And they say environments of systems could include organism, ecosystems, and the earth. So there is an emphasis on idea that matter that is not food, like the non-living parts of it, and also changes into matters. And then, of course, you can see what cross-cutting concepts, DCIs, and science and engineering practices you should be doing when you're addressing this SEP. So then, going back to my slide deck, I do have these. So some of the ideas here is that they would be able to figure out what the components of the model are. Were all those components in this model, in this assessment? Did we have matter? Did we have plants, animals, decomposers, environment? Yeah. So even though it's not meant to be a checkbox, we could check those off, right? Are they asked to describe some relationships between these? And I think they did that nicely. And so this just, that's the second part is above. And then what about 3, connections? Are they actually making use in their models of how these things are all connected together? And remember that they were asked to draw arrows and describe, etc. So this was also making the connection of what happens when you introduce a species, such as the rabbits, into the ecosystem. So I hope it's very clear that we looked at an assessment that did a pretty good job of addressing what students should know by the end of a session, a lesson sequence that's addressing that performance expectation. But what happens if you're looking at an assessment that you're not sure about? Well, there is some resources on Stanislaus that help kind of break down how to look at the assessment as an educator and see whether your students, if this aligns with what your expectations are for your students after you finish a lesson. And so this is just a way to unpack the performance expectations using this tool. And I think this tool was introduced to you in session 3, but just a reminder that you can do that. So in this case, we were actually looking at it and seeing whether this assessment seemed appropriate, etc. And these are some of the steps that you might take. You would look at it yourself. You would analyze whether there's a presence of a phenomenon and whether students could evaluate the items, identify the capacities that your students would be required to in order to perform this, see if they can, if you can analyze their work and anticipate what their student responses might be. And then, of course, you would want to score and organize this assessment. So from this point on, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, and he's going to talk about ways that we might think about making our own or, again, sort of evaluating and tweaking some. So Matthew, I can just turn pages as you want, or do you want to share?
Perfect. Let's do that. Yeah. So just, you know, I want to articulate how much I love that previous assessment and tying into one of Jenny's slides that she had, which is assessment for learning. So let's say your students are not super confident in their ability to generate models. That builds up a model. If you're trying to teach teachers, if you happen to be one of the people that is in charge of helping educate your teachers, like what does it mean to make a model in the NGSS? I feel like that particular SNAP assessment is a fantastic illustration that builds it up. And so they're great. The other thing that it does is what's on this screen here is that we're trying to really extend our learning into new phenomena that we've never seen before. And this is this word that Open Syed likes to use, which is a transfer task. And that means you're supposed to transfer what you know from one context into another. And so that would be a really great place to look for these tasks, giving your students practice with things like that SNAP assessment. And then if you go to the next slide here, you know, just we showed this one already, but because there are so many good resources that are out there now. When we started doing these workshops about the cast, there were not very many, and we had to talk a lot about how to make your own. But before you spend too much time making your own, do look at these great tasks that are available here on the Stanislaw database. Look at the interim assessments like we talked about in a previous session. Wonder of Science has a few good ones, and building more. InterOrbit's a paid site that's really nice, and some links to other states' practice tests. We showed that once before. So those are all places you should go if you are trying to find the great assessments out there. However, cue slide 32. What if you can't find what you need? You need to build it. There we go. Great. We're in sync, Jenny. So you need some resources about how to build your own assignments, own performance tasks, your own 3D tasks that are going to take things through. So if you go to the next slide, there are these links that you'll see are 4 great documents that really describe this process. But I'm going to try and condense it down into like 5 minutes for you for those 4 documents. But do look there because they're quite extensive and quite clear, actually. They do a nice job. So let's go to the next slide here. So and yet another document, actually 4 documents plus some bonus ones here. So keep going here. There's lots of good documents out there. So this is the boiling it all down. So you've seen what I said is that rabbit assessment, which I love. What do I love about it? And it includes all these key components that are shown here, kind of in size order of what I think is important. That is a phenomenon-driven assessment that's in here. So that means that it's based upon that rabbit scenario. It's really well aligned to the 3D, to all three components of, you're looking at the transfer of energy and matter, you're looking at the ecosystems knowledge and from disciplinary core ideas, and you're looking at the practice of modeling. Students are able to make what they learned visible in the models. It's grade appropriate, it's accurate, all those things. So basically, this is what we're striving for, is each of these things. And then at the bottom here, we have fair as one of the things, which maybe shouldn't be so small, but it seems like it comes in as a check at the end, which is maybe why we put it down there as small. So if you go to the next slide, you can see how this works out as you're trying to make an assessment. It's kind of a little iterative process where you've got the dance between these 3 different things that are jogging you around. And go ahead and hit the button here, and you can see how these tie into what we just said before, that there are these 3 things. There's choosing a phenomenon, so that's phenomenon driven. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then choosing your assessment format and aligning to the 3 dimensions. So I've got a few slides that I'm going to go through that will talk you through each of these things. So let's start with this phenomenon, the phenomenon driven and the fair and sensitive parts of things. So go ahead and hit the next button. And you can see that we have to remember the butterloaf scenario that I told you. And at the beginning of this thing, and we've shown this slide, and I love this example because what it does is it is an example that is something that's close enough that you have the tools you need to respond to it, but it's new enough that it really pushes you to look at something you've never seen before. And so that is the balancing act you need to do. And so if you hit the button, I think it should pop up here, our rabbit scenario. And Ginny made a big deal about this. She said, do your students know about Australian ecosystems? And they don't necessarily. That's the new enough side of things, but it's close enough to what you've learned already because you've learned about ecosystems, and so that's good. But we do want to be mindful of the next slide here, where we're thinking about that balance is a little bit different for every student because they all have a little bit different prior knowledge. And so we're trying to make this fair to everyone, both in our own classrooms, and of course the state test people are very worried about that as well. But we should be worried about it in our own classrooms and really thinking, do all groups of students have the prior knowledge that they need? And would there be any particular group that would have an advantage or a disadvantage because of the phenomenon that we chose that's more familiar to them? You can give an example of this, of if a phenomenon is talking all about the beach, and we live in way far inland in the Central Valley, and none of our students have ever been to the beach. If that were on a standardized test, those students would have a slight disadvantage, the students in the Central Valley would have a slight disadvantage. So we have to be mindful of that and try and give all the resources students need to get themselves so they have what they need to answer this prompt. And then There's also this sensitive marker. I didn't mention that before. Just going through to make sure there's nothing that's going to be upsetting to students. I find that sometimes I choose animals dying and things like that, and maybe that's not maybe that's going to, if we have a visceral reaction to the phenomenon that interrupts our ability to think about it, that's probably not good, and particularly if some students are more likely to have that visceral phenomenon than others, or visceral reaction than others. So just great things to keep in mind with our phenomenon choice. So let's go to the next slide here and remind ourselves of this diagram where we are here looking at all of this dance. So let's say we chose a really great phenomenon. Now we need to think about the learning objective here and trying to make sure that we're pulling the right type of learning objective. And of course, how do we choose the phenomenon? We had to think about the learning objective as well. So it's, where I started in phenomenon in the slide presentation. Maybe I should have started in learning objectives at the beginning here. But let's go ahead and jump into this particular feature. And let's talk about the practices. Every assessment is going to have your students doing something. And so there are, in one of the resources, you can see it's at the bottom there, STEM teaching tool number 30. There's a great set of resources that goes through, like, what should an assessment look like where they're actually doing a practice, say modeling. So the first thing in this, there are a bunch of options. Basically, it's a menu of task formats. And so this option says, present students with a scenario that describes a phenomenon. So hit our button here, Jenny. You're going to try and cue. I made some pictures, Spira. That's the Australian ecosystem that it introduces, and kangaroos and all that good stuff. Then ask students to develop a model that represents amounts, relationships, scales, or patterns in the natural world. And we did that. Then ask students to either compare two models or revise one of their models to justify their revisions with disciplinary core ideas. And that's where we started adding to our model, and we asked them to do that. And then step 3 here is ask students to write an explanation for the phenomenon or problem using the model as supporting evidence. And that's where we built on that to really look at, or maybe it was the ask students to develop a model with components, interaction mechanisms that answers a specific question about the dead rabbits. And so you can see that we kind of build up in all the different stages that we did during our rabbit assessment. There's a method to that. There's a way you could build that up piece by piece and use this particular resource to help you find that. And that's just for modeling, but there are other ones for other practices if you're trying to assess other practices. Each one has task format options for you. All right. So next, Ginny already talked about the evidence statements, and those are good, but there's another part of these 3 dimensions that we need to think about, and that's the grade appropriateness. And within the framework here in California, our NGSS framework, there is Appendix 1, which shows the progressions of what it looks like. Oh, and I cut off the headers here. That's too bad. What it looks like in early elementary is this first box here, where it says grade 2. At the end of grades 3 to 5, we should be doing that next level of understanding when it comes to ecosystems. By the time we get to the end of middle school, our students should be able to do the 3rd box over, and our high school students are building on all the 3 of those and adding the 4th one. So when you're designing your assessment, you need to make sure you're targeting the right level of things, and that's spelled out very nicely in this document called the progressions. And it's always good for us to be thinking about what's before and what's after as well. So we're kind of thinking about, as we teach, what are we shooting for here? Next up, we've got the right format. Of course, the last piece of this is choosing how you're going to actually have students demonstrate their understanding of this phenomenon and these practices and these cross-cutting concepts. And that goes to really a balance between time and depth. If you don't have much time, you ask really quick, discrete items, multiple choice things. It's especially your time as a grader. Then there's constructed responses or rich performance tasks. And so that's the end members for there. And of course, you all know about that balancing act between time and depth. And we always lose, no matter how hard we try. So, but the format is important there. So that's kind of the theory behind how you go about building these assessments. It is challenging, but knowing that theory will help you implement the performance tasks that do exist, even if you don't ever create your own assessments. So that's I think, is that the end of my section here? I think so. Yes, it
I was
is.
gonna
Oh,
just do one more thing and just
mhm.
remind people that the progressions also talk about the progressions of the CCCs and SEPs. And remember that on CAST, not all of the assessments are three-dimensional, but they're all at least two-dimensional. So it's also important to think about those the scaffolding that needs to happen as we move students through their ideas of cross-cutting concepts. For example, this one talked a lot about systems and system models from kindergarten all the way up through what we're expecting a high school student to be able to do. So I just wanted to remind you that those progressions are also part of this framework chapter or appendix 1. And then I think the only other thing is that it's important to think about. I think I'm doing this slide. I don't know who's doing this slide, but I can certainly talk to it.
I
Uh,
think, Jenny, we're going to show a source for ideas or for examples.
for
So
rubrics and stuff. Good. Okay.
yeah, so the purpose of this slide is to, before you begin identifying which rubrics align with content, skills, concepts in a new item you've developed, it's of course, it helps to have a rich source of examples to work with. And you might choose to modify an existing rubric, scoring guide to fit your new item's specific goals. Or you could use items that have already been aligned with uh, as an example for that work. But practice tests and interim assessments both have rubrics and scoring guides that you can use as examples. And I'll drop a link here in the chat with a link to both of those resources. The first link goes to the rubrics and scoring guides for the practice tests. Those are openly available and a little bit easier to get to. Interims are a bit harder to find because they require a login to the testing system, TOMS, but they are available too if you have an account which allows you to administer interim assessments to students. So that's a great thing to be sure you do have. So you can go about using these in the classroom or using the data from these in the future. If we look at the next slide, here's an image of what it looks like. This is what the links to those scoring guides and examples look like on the CAST-LPAC site. Practice test materials on the left don't require a login, as I said. IB resources, the interim assessments for science, they'll require a login in TOMS. And here we're showing you the materials that are located there under the resources tab. You end up like I said, it's a little harder to find. After selecting CAST interim assessment, secure materials in the secure materials box, then choosing a grade level. And those are both available to you. And if you don't have a link to get into TOMS, reach out to your site administrators or your site CASP coordinator or your LEA CASP coordinator. There'll be somebody who organizes that. If you don't know who that is, your principal or assistant principal will know.
All right, so you might be thinking to yourself, oh no, it's the last session. Go to the next slide. There it is. Don't worry. We have lots of resources to support you. We've got your back on this. Let's go to the next slide. Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about CASE?
Yes. So one option is to join CASE, and many of you hopefully know that the annual meeting is on October 16th, I think, through the 19th. And it's in Palm Springs. So if you need to get warm, come out to Palm Springs and join us. So CASE has many different kinds of workshops and networking opportunities, etc. And we are doing a CASE cast short course. So though we build this part 4 as getting you to try to build some assessments, we obviously don't have time to do that. But if you come to our short course, it's 3 hours. So we have lots of time to do that. Well, it'll go really fast because we have lots of fun stuff to help scaffold building cast like assessments for your students. Anyway, that's coming, and it's not too late to register for the meetings. They still have plenty of spots. Then the other thing, this is also my slide. I am also, because I don't wear enough hats in my life, I'm also on the steering committee for the Cal MSCS group, which is the California Mathematics Science and Computer Science Partnership. And we are giving the Trending Tuesday on October 14th, which is next week. And Matthew and myself are part of that team. And we also have two other people from the state, from different county offices helping us with this. And what it is it's the same kind of setup as this, where there's about an hour where we try to cut off ourselves a little early, which I'm going to have to do in a few minutes here so that we can answer some questions. But we're giving an overview of CAST again. So this might be something you get some of your admin to come to who don't have time to go to 4 parts. This kind of focuses on county office and administrators who are interested in knowing a little more about CAST, but didn't want to come to our 4-part series. So they can come to this. And then again, there'll be some more resources at the end of that and more directions to go with that. So that's coming up. You do need to register in order to get the Zoom link, just like you had to for this one. And that's from 4 to 5. And it's on it next
And
Tuesday.
Jenny, also that one, for those people that are here and have come to all our 4 sessions, it would not be anything interesting because it's the same stuff. It's a compressed version, but it is something for other people to get the compressed version that haven't seen it.
Yes. Unless you fell asleep during one of our sessions, then you can come to one of these. But really, we encourage you to invite somebody that hasn't had a chance to come to all 4 because of time or uh, other reasons. So any more questions about that one, please reach out. But you'll also notice, just an aside, there are other types of Trending Tuesday subjects. And so I do encourage you to look at some of those. They're really nicely done.
Stephen and I will be partnering with our colleagues over at STEM Science to do a one-day in-person From Insight to Impact connecting science data, supports, and instruction. We'll be looking at the dashboard and how you can leverage that information, looking at interims, looking at tools for teachers lesson, how you can really bring it all together to support your students' needs right where it is. Now, it is a full day session and it is physically located at a place, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to see each other in person, but it's not always what everyone can do, in which case, at the top, you will see our LACOE Assessment Unit catalog. We have all sorts of assessment trainings that Stephen and I do. We talk about math, we talk about STEM science, we talk about all the different things. So if you want to take a look at our catalog and see what we're offering, hit that next slide for me, please. As Ginny said, if don't come to this if you've already been to all 4 sessions or if you fell asleep. I hope you didn't fall asleep. But we will be doing it again. We'll be running it again in the winter. So if you really felt like you got something really beneficial out of this and you would like someone else to get something beneficial out of this and they can't really attend that one day is just not enough, we're doing it again. So feel free to share this with others and join us. And I think we have one more final
I just want to
pitch.
say another thing about this is, remember that some of you are hopefully out of the LA area, because this is available to anybody. So if you have any colleagues that are teaching in rural schools and they don't ever get to come to actually in-person types of PD, encourage them to jump on.
Thank you. And finally, we just wanted to put a little pitch out there for people. Math and science go hand in hand. Our STEM math, LACOE math unit would like to share. We've got a math publishers fair coming up, so we can see all the materials and resources. And then there's going to be a book study, Choosing to See the Mathematical Brilliance of Black Students. So wanted to make sure that those were available to you as well. And I think that brings us to questions and answers. Please join me for a moment to celebrate our wonderful presenters who have done such an amazing job in bringing us this information. We'd like to thank you on behalf of all of us for joining us this evening. We will be here for your questions, but if you do not have any questions, we'd like to wish you a wonderful evening.
I'm going to stop share so that you can.
And Stephen, will you stop recording so that people can feel